Hello again, I'm attorney Robert Flessis for Robbins & Lloyd Career Training Institute. In this video, we're going to talk about the inspection report. There were changes made in the reporting requirements, and if you're active in real estate, you've probably reviewed one and noticed the changes. The changes, I believe, are for the better because it makes it easier to identify reported defects by the inspector. Let's get started. New legislation was effective on June 21st, 2021 that changed the way that home inspectors operated. The legislation set forth guidelines for home inspectors to operate under. The WB11 offer to purchase sets forth the definition of a defect. That's our starting point. What does the offer state? Well, in order to qualify for a defect, there must be a condition that would have a significant adverse effect on the value of the property, that would significantly impair the health or safety of future occupants of the property, or that if it were not repaired, removed, or replaced, it would significantly shorten or adversely affect the expected normal life of the premises. By the way, remember the word significantly if you didn't catch that. What are the general rules of inspections? An inspector is not authorized to conduct any inspection if it's not stated in the offer to purchase. The inspector can only observe the property. But even if you don't indicate a specific item to be inspected in the offer, an inspection automatically includes looking for leaking carbon monoxide, LP or natural gas used as a fuel source. If you want to go beyond just inspecting, then you're going to want a test. If you want to include testing, you need to specify exactly what you want to test in the offer to purchase. Otherwise, it's not allowed. You must specify the areas to be tested. You have to specify the tests or tests to be conducted. After testing, the tester must restore the property to the original condition that they found it in, unless the seller agrees otherwise. After the inspection or test, the buyer must provide copies of the inspection and testing reports to the seller. If environmental pollution is detected, the seller may be obligated to report pollution to the DNR. Wisconsin Statutes 440.975 controls the contents of an inspection report. What are the requirements? The inspector must conduct a reasonably competent and diligent inspection, detect observable conditions to improvement to the property, and submit a written report to their client. Here's some of the other things that must be included in the inspector's report. The inspector must list components to an improvement and list the inspected components. The inspector report must also contain the following: the property address, the home inspector's name, the inspection date, the name of the person preparing the report for the inspector, the inspection preparation date, any revision dates, detectable defects found, and include the use of a term defect in the report. A defect that's discovered by the inspector must meet the following definition. A defect means a condition or any component of an improvement that a home inspector determines on the basis of the home inspector's judgment on the day of an inspection would significantly impair the health or safety of occupants of a property, or that if not repaired, removed, or replaced, would significantly impair the health or safety of occupants of a property, or that if not repaired, removed, or replaced, would significantly shorten or adversely affect the expected normal life of the component. Did you notice the word significantly again? Now keep in mind that the new legislation was enacted in 2021 to help buyers and sellers. It helped inspectors so that a buyer or seller didn't think that a home inspector was giving a warranty to the future condition of a property. An inspection is conducted and is a snapshot of the property on the particular day of the inspection. The report must include the following: a list of observable defects that qualify under the statutory definition that I just recited, and a list of components in need of repair, maintenance, or to monitor or evaluate further. Every inspection report must include a summary page. A big change in the home inspection business is that now a home inspector is required to be registered in Wisconsin, and they're required to complete pre-examination education of 40 hours. What's not required to be reported? Well, the life expectancy of a component, the cause for the need for the repair, correction methods, materials required, or cost to repair, the suitability of specialized use of an improvement, a proposed repair's compliance with regulatory comments, an explanation of why certain components were not required to be inspected, any warranties or guarantees of any kind, a calculation of strength, adequacy, or efficiency of a component. An inspector is not required to perform any procedure that could damage a component or try to repair a component or enter an area that's dangerous to the inspector or others. An inspector doesn't even have to try and operate a component that's inoperable, try to get it to respond, or disturb insulation or move items for access. An inspector is not required to determine the effectiveness, predict the future conditions, project operating costs or estimates, or evaluate acoustic effectiveness. An inspector doesn't need to report the absence or presence of pests or perform an inspection of underground items, or items not permanently installed, or cosmetic items, or inspect for hazardous substances. Any inspector may not report verbally or in writing the market value of property or make any purchase decision on behalf of their client. Commenting on the market value is left to your market analysis or an appraiser conducted by an appraiser. An inspector can be sanctioned if the property inspector acts as an inspector when that specific inspector is also acting as a broker or an appraisal for that specific property. An inspector must have insurance and a bond. One big change in the inspector's report is the use of the word defect to flag conditions that qualify under the definition of a defect. This labeling requirement is very helpful to the reader of an inspection report. You can actually page through the report and stop at each item that's flagged as a defect. The reports are easier to read and quicker to review, especially when reviewing the summary page. Each inspector can use their own version of an inspection report. This is unlike the WB forms that you're required to use as a licensee. Use of the word defect doesn't alleviate the back and forth between a buyer and seller as to whether or not the inspector's identification of a defect is in fact a defect. That argument is not affected by the new legislation. That's a topic that both a buyer and seller should consult with an attorney if there's a dispute in this regard. Similar to receiving a complaint from the DSPS for incompetent practice by violating any of the statutory rules, any party can file a complaint against a home inspector for their competency. Let's say that the seller enters into a contract with a buyer to purchase the property. The buyer performs their inspection. A home inspector performs the inspection and identifies defects. The buyer then submits their notice to the seller identifying those defects and attaches the inspection report. Let's also say that the buyer and seller attempt to negotiate a resolution to the defect but can't reach an agreement. So a cancellation agreement and mutual release is signed by the buyer and the seller. Here's the question. Can the seller use the inspection report that was purchased by their previous buyer? Yes, they can. And under Wisconsin Stat 709.35, the seller, when dealing with the next buyer, must amend their property condition report first to disclose defects that the seller became aware of. Well, in this situation, the seller became aware of a defect through the inspector's report, and that defect must be reported to the subsequent buyer through an amended property condition report. The best way to handle this reporting, as I said, is to not only amend the condition report, but attach a copy of the prior inspection report. You're disclosing everything that's known to you. But this is a case-by-case situation before you make a decision. Well, what if the seller only amends their condition report but didn't attach the prior buyer's inspection report? What's the best way to handle that? You probably wouldn't provide the prior buyer's inspection report to the buyer, but if you wanted to disclose the report, the best way to cover yourself from any liability would be to get the written permission of all parties to the transaction that generated the report in the first place. You could write in the offer that if the parties are unable to resolve any conditions constituting an alleged defect, that the inspection report provided the buyer becomes the property of the seller. Well, why would a buyer reject that provision? The buyer has no need to use that report any longer because they're moving on. Let's say that your seller doesn't amend their condition report, What do you do as the listing agent? Well, as you will remember from my previous videos, the listing agent has a duty to disclose material adverse facts to the parties in writing and in a timely manner. As the agent, you have to disclose anything that, one, has a significant, there's that word again, adverse effect on the value of the property. Two, significantly reduces the structural integrity of the property. Three, presents a significant health risk to the occupants of the property. Or four, is information that indicates that a party to the transaction is not able to or does not intend to meet their obligations under the contract. Then the issue constitutes an adverse fact. Lastly, if a previous inspector's report is used for subsequent buyers, the new statute absolves the inspector from any liability from errors or omissions in that report. You should make sure that the prior inspection report is provided for informational purposes only and that the buyer should perform their own inspection report. Well, that's it for part 3 of course 4. The next and final video in this course is the review. I'll see you in the next video.